What if the greatest royal love story of our time wasn't really a love story at all? What if it was a strategy, carefully mapped out in ink before the vows were even spoken? Imagine opening a wardrobe door, expecting to see clothes and jewelry, but instead discovering a leather-bound journal that rewrites everything you thought you knew about your marriage. That's the moment we're diving into tonight. Prince Harry's alleged discovery inside Meghan Markle's private belongings isn't just gossip. It's the kind of revelation that forces us to ask, how much of what we've been shown was real, and how much was stagecraft? Think back to May 2018. The world was transfixed by the images beamed from Windsor Castle. The glowing bride in white, the prince with his uniform pressed to perfection, crowds cheering, billions watching from living rooms across the planet. It looked like a fairy tale reborn for the modern era. But behind those polished smiles and tightly controlled optics, was there already an exit plan in motion? Tonight, we'll peel back the curtain to explore that chilling possibility. Because if what Harry allegedly found in that journal is true, then Meghan had scripted her future not with her husband, but with her brand, before the carriage even left St. George's Chapel. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And let me ask you this. How would you feel if the person you loved most had written, long before your wedding, "Stay long enough to build the brand, then go"? Could you forgive them? Could you ever see your marriage the same way again? Or would every memory suddenly feel like a performance you hadn't realized you were part of? Harry has long been painted as the vulnerable royal, the one who wears his heart on his sleeve, the boy who walked behind his mother's coffin and carried that grief into adulthood. To many, Meghan represented healing, a chance at happiness, a soulmate who could protect him from the shadows of palace life. But the journal tells a colder story. In its pages, reportedly, Meghan's words outline steps. Step 1, become global. Step 2, break free. Step 3, build empire. These aren't the musings of a starry-eyed bride. They read more like the business plan of a corporate mogul. The contrast between Harry's emotional devotion and Meghan's alleged calculated plotting could not be more jarring. Now, skeptics might say, journals are just thoughts, private reflections, not always meant to be literal blueprints. And that's true. But the power lies not just in the words themselves, but in their timing. Dates reportedly suggest she wrote these entries before she even walked down the aisle. Before the vows, before the promises. That's where the knife twists deepest. Because timing reveals intent, and intent changes everything. It's worth remembering how swiftly Meghan's presence in the royal family was framed in terms of transformation. From the moment she appeared, she was hailed as the modernizer, the fresh face, the American who would bring Hollywood glamour into an institution defined by centuries of tradition. The press couldn't get enough. Fashion covers, primetime interviews, charity appearances packaged as cinematic moments. And Harry, well, Harry looked smitten. He looked like a man who had finally found peace. But behind those glowing headlines, were her journal entries already painting a much darker vision? Consider the optics. Meghan, an actress skilled at playing roles, suddenly cast as a duchess. But what if she was playing more than a role for the cameras? What if the royal life itself was the biggest performance of all? Her journal entries, if true, read like lines in a script, stay just long enough to gain the global spotlight, then pivot to independence, cashing in on fame and freedom. Doesn't that sound eerily similar to what ultimately unfolded with Megxit? The carefully orchestrated move to North America, the Netflix deals, the book tours, the speaking engagements. Was it all foreshadowed in that leather-bound volume Harry stumbled upon? Now, let's pause and ask, why would Meghan even keep such a journal? Some argue she has always documented her life, whether through acting scripts, lifestyle blogs, or personal reflections. But a private diary filled with calculated strategies about breaking free of royal life? That crosses into the realm of intent. And when Harry allegedly flipped through those pages, the question burning in his mind must have been, did she ever love me for me? Or was I always just part of the plan? It's a question that strikes at the core of every relationship. Authenticity, trust. If love is about vulnerability, then betrayal is about realizing that the vulnerability was exploited. Harry's heartbreak in this scenario isn't just about the words on the page. It's about the shattering of an illusion. He thought he had escaped the traps of palace politics by choosing Meghan. Instead, He may have discovered he had walked into a different kind of trap, a personal one, written down in her own hand. This discovery also explains something else: the cracks we've seen in their public facade, the tense body language at events, the carefully staged but oddly stiff family photos, the moments when Harry looks withdrawn, almost like a man grappling with two conflicting realities. On one hand, the love story he has to defend publicly. On the other, the journal entries that gnaw at his private doubts. Could this be why Harry often looks more conflicted than confident when discussing his marriage? Could this be why his memoir carried such heavy undertones of pain rather than triumph? And let's not forget the royal family itself. If Harry found this journal, did he keep it secret? Or did word eventually reach William, Charles, even the late Queen? Imagine the devastation in those circles. To discover that Meghan may have planned an exit before she even entered, what would that say about Harry's judgment? About the monarchy's ability to protect itself? Could this alleged journal explain why the royals have remained so icy toward Harry and Meghan? Why reconciliation always feels just out of reach? But here's the bigger, haunting question. Was Meghan's plan unique to her? Or is this the story of how modern celebrity intersects with royal duty? Was Meghan simply doing what countless Hollywood figures have done, strategizing their image, controlling their narrative, except this time within the walls of Buckingham Palace? If so, then perhaps the tragedy isn't just Harry's. Perhaps it's all of ours, for having believed in a love story that may never have existed in the way we imagined. So, as we begin this deep dive into the hidden journal and the betrayal it suggests, I want you to keep one thought in mind. Harry went searching in a wardrobe. He wasn't looking for secrets, just answers. But what he found was far more dangerous than forgotten clothes or old letters. He found words that could unravel a marriage, a monarchy, and a myth all at once. Words that forced him to see the woman he loved not as his partner, but as his plan. And once you see that kind of truth, you can never unsee it. But here's the thing, this is only the beginning. Because what Harry read next didn't just hint at ambition. It pointed directly at betrayal. And the entry dated before their wedding night. Well, that's where the story takes a darker turn. It began with suspicion. Not the kind that shouts. Not the kind that storms in with slammed doors and fiery accusations. No, this was the quiet kind. The sort of suspicion that creeps into your bones when little things stop adding up. Harry had lived his entire life surrounded by secrets, but he never imagined he'd one day start suspecting his own wife. The story goes that it was late. The children were asleep. Meghan had gone to bed earlier than usual, exhausted after a day filled with carefully curated Zoom calls, emails to her team, and discussions about the next big move. Harry, restless, paced the hallway. Something had been gnawing at him. A sense that behind the glossy exterior, there was more he wasn't seeing. He wasn't looking for evidence. He wasn't looking for betrayal. He was simply looking for peace of mind. And that's what drove him into Meghan's private wardrobe. Picture it. The creak of the door, the faint scent of perfumes clinging to silk dresses, the dim glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the room. Harry pushed aside hangers heavy with designer gowns, shoes lined in meticulous rows, handbags stacked with surgical precision. He knew this was Meghan's sanctuary, her private space, her carefully curated collection of luxury and image. But in the far corner, tucked behind a garment bag, was something that didn't belong. It wasn't a gown. It wasn't jewelry. It was a small, leather-bound book, dark brown, its edges worn, its surface slightly cracked as if it had been opened and closed many times. And it was hidden, not displayed, not stored like an accessory, but tucked away as though it carried weight. Something secret, something not meant to be found. Harry reached for it. His fingers hesitated. He knew what it meant to invade privacy, to cross that line. But something deeper pushed him, a voice that whispered, "This could be the answer to the questions you haven't dared ask." His heart pounded as he pulled it free. It was heavier than it looked, as though the ink inside carried more than words, as though it carried intent. Imagine that moment. You're a husband. You trust the woman you love. And yet, standing there in the dim light, journal in hand, every instinct is screaming at you. Open it. Do you? Or do you put it back and pretend you never saw it? Harry opened it. The first page wasn't a diary entry in the way one might expect. No dreamy recollections. No romantic musings. Instead, what stared back at him was clinical, precise, almost like a blueprint. 3 lines, written with deliberate strokes. Step 1, become global. Step 2, break free. Step 3, build empire. Harry froze. His breath caught. He blinked, as if hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something else. Something harmless. But they didn't. They stayed there, black on white, sharp and undeniable. And in that instant, suspicion hardened into fear. Because these weren't notes about a happy future together. They weren't dreams of family life, love, or commitment. They were steps, instructions, a plan, cold, methodical, and calculated. And worse, the date at the top of the page was months before their wedding. What would you do in his place? Would you close the book, tell yourself it was harmless brainstorming? Or would you keep reading, knowing full well that every word might cut deeper than the last? Harry kept reading. The entries were neat, organized. Not random scribbles of a woman thinking aloud, but deliberate records of intent. Mentions of image strategy. Notes about how long to stay in before pivoting out. The phrase "stay long enough to build the brand" appeared more than once, underlined, emphasized. He felt his throat tighten. For Harry, marriage had always meant trust. He had leapt into it with Meghan, against the doubts of others, believing his heart knew better. He had defended her against the press, against his family, against the entire institution of monarchy itself. And here, hidden in her wardrobe, was something that suggested it might have all been an act. He slammed the book shut. His hands shook. The leather felt hot, almost burning, as if it knew it had betrayed him. He looked around the wardrobe, suddenly seeing it differently. The designer clothes weren't just clothes anymore. They were costumes. The accessories weren't just luxury, they were props. Every piece seemed staged, curated, weaponized for an image larger than love. And the worst part? He had walked right into it. Willingly. Blindly. Let's stop here for a moment and ask. How many of us have ignored red flags in the name of love? How many times have you convinced yourself that someone's ambition, someone's controlling nature, someone's manipulative streak was just who they are, not a sign of something deeper? Harry wasn't just any husband. He was a prince, raised in a world of caution. And still, even he had been blindsided. But that night, as he stood there in that wardrobe, journal in hand, he knew he couldn't unsee it. The entries existed. They were written. They were dated. And they told a story that didn't match the one he had lived. What do you do when the person you trusted most leaves breadcrumbs that suggest your marriage is built on calculation, not connection? Do you confront them? Do you hide what you know, hoping it's not true? Or do you read on, even if it destroys you? Harry chose the last. He flipped to the next entry. The words that followed didn't soothe him. They didn't offer hope. They sharpened the knife. More references to timelines, to launch moments, to the global pivot. Meghan had written about strategy, about controlling narratives, about choosing her battles with the press. Nothing about her husband's heart. Nothing about family. Nothing about love. And that's when Harry realized. He wasn't reading a diary. He was reading a script. But what he didn't yet know was that the next entry would reveal something even more devastating. Because on the following page was a date he recognized. A date tied to one of the most sacred milestones of their relationship. And what Meghan wrote that day would confirm Harry's worst fears. The wardrobe discovery was only the beginning. And what came next, no one could have predicted. Not all discoveries scream their truth immediately. Some whisper it, insidiously, leaving you to piece together the horror one line at a time. That's what Harry experienced as he turned those first fragile pages of Meghan's journal. If the wardrobe was the doorway, then the first entries were the descent into something he couldn't have prepared for. The writing was beautiful, the script flowing, intentional, not rushed, not chaotic. Each word written as though it mattered, as though it was meant to stand the test of time. That alone rattled Harry. This wasn't idle doodling. This wasn't a young bride's dreamy notes about her upcoming marriage. No, these words read like stone-carved commandments, deliberate and chillingly clear. Not love letters. Not memories. Cold, calculated steps. That thought must have echoed in Harry's head. Because the first full entry wasn't about him. Not really. It wasn't about their first dates, their secret meetings, the romance that had captivated the public. Instead, it was about optics. The way she wrote about their relationship read less like personal reflection and more like strategy, bullet points, observations, tactical considerations. One entry allegedly read, Optics matter more than feelings. The world must see him as my protector, my equal, my prize. Stay poised. Never let them doubt me. Harry's chest tightened as he read those words. To him, those moments had been real. The laughter, the stolen glances, the long walks away from cameras, they had meant everything. But in these entries, they were described as moments to be controlled, opportunities to be seized, stages to be managed. Do you see the difference? One man thought he was living love. The woman he trusted may have been documenting leverage. But the blow that truly knocked the wind from Harry came just a few pages later. At the top of a crisp, white page was a date, December 2017. He knew it instantly. That was the month they announced their engagement to the world. While the public swooned at the photos in Kensington Palace's gardens, Meghan had written this in her journal. Step into the role. Be the dream. Every girl wants to be here. I must act like I was born for it. But don't get lost in the fantasy. This is temporary. End goal. Independence, platform, empire. Imagine reading that. The very week the world celebrated their love, Meghan had allegedly scribbled a note reminding herself that this wasn't the finish line, but the first step. For Harry, that entry alone must have felt like a betrayal carved into his soul. And then came the list. Harry would later flip through to find entire pages filled not with emotions, but with tasks. Almost like a roadmap. He read phrases like, cultivate global recognition, establish philanthropic branding early, secure visibility through royal platform, step carefully, always look beyond the crown. It was as if Meghan had been treating her marriage not as a bond, but as a business venture, a merger with a pre-planned exit clause. Harry's hand trembled as he flipped to another entry, dated February 2018. This was just weeks before their wedding invitations were sent. He remembered how excited he had been then, telling his friends he had finally found the one. Yet on that same day, Meghan had written, timing is crucial. Secure position before critics grow too loud. The crown offers access. Use it wisely. Smile. Comply. But always remember, my path is my own. What do you even do with that knowledge? The man had believed he was about to marry the love of his life. Meanwhile, she was allegedly reminding herself not to lose sight of her own path. The contradiction is staggering. Let's stop here and ask you. Have you ever seen someone smile in your face while secretly thinking of how they'll move past you? How chilling is it to realize you might have been someone's stepping stone all along? But Harry didn't stop reading. He couldn't. He needed answers, even if they destroyed him. The journal didn't just contain vague notes. It contained moments tied directly to their relationship. Little comments about public events, about her role in interviews, about how certain statements might play with the audience. One line allegedly read, public loves the fairy tale, give them enough of it, but never too much. Keep them hungry. Think about that. What Harry had believed were natural expressions of affection, holding hands, long gazes, public gestures, might have been rehearsed, planned, and rationed out for maximum effect. It wasn't affection. It was performance. And then came the line that truly broke him. He thinks it's forever. I think it's leverage. There it was. Ink on paper. No room for interpretation. No way to soften it. The man who had given up his family, his home, and his royal role for her, reading her words that reduced his devotion to a tool. He had thought she saw him as her partner, her safe harbor. Instead, he saw that she had viewed him as her ladder. At that moment, Harry nearly closed the journal for good. His hands shook. His eyes burned. He wanted to throw it across the room, to rid himself of the poison within its pages. But he couldn't, because another date caught his eye. May 18th, 2018. The night before the wedding. He froze. He knew he shouldn't look, but he had to. The entry began innocently enough. Notes about the dress, the ceremony, the cameras, the atmosphere. But then the final line on the page cut straight through him. Tomorrow the world will watch a love story. Only I know the truth. It's the beginning of the brand. Can you imagine that? Standing at the altar, believing with every beat of your heart that you're pledging your life to the woman of your dreams, while her private words reduce the moment to nothing more than a launch. A product reveal. A marketing event. Harry closed the book then, but the words seared into his mind. They wouldn't leave. They couldn't. Because they weren't just cruel, they were proof. Proof that everything he had believed might have been a carefully managed illusion. And yet, the deeper betrayal was still to come. Because as Harry read on, the journal moved past plans and optics. It began speaking about him directly, his weaknesses, his role, even his family. And those words would wound more than any staged smile or calculated step. The journal hadn't finished breaking him. It had only just begun. Let's start with a question. When you think about a love story, what comes to mind? You picture devotion, passion, sacrifice. You imagine someone looking at you and seeing forever. But what happens when you peel back the curtain and realize that what you thought was love might have been a strategy all along? That's exactly the question Harry found himself asking as he sat with Meghan's journal in his hands. The words he read didn't sound like love letters. They sounded like instructions. Notes, strategies, outlines. Phrases that belonged in a business plan, not the private musings of a woman preparing to marry into the royal family. Harry flipped through page after page, desperate for something, anything, that showed genuine affection. Maybe a line about how she loved the way he laughed. Maybe a note about how safe she felt with him. Something personal, something human. But those pages weren't there. What he found instead were references to public appearances, mentions of image control, and reflections on how the media was reacting to her every move. One line that stuck out was dated early in their courtship. "Harry adores me. That will be the narrative. Play it. Protect it. Use it." Harry froze when he read that. To him, adoration had been natural, raw, undeniable. He had fallen hard, and he had never hidden it. But here it was, in black ink, reduced to a narrative, a tool to be played and used. For Harry, that must have been the first moment he truly asked himself, did she ever love me at all? Let's pause and think about this. Imagine giving someone your heart, only to discover that in their private writings, your love was never the centerpiece. It was just a prop, a useful device in their bigger plan. Could you ever look at them the same way again? Harry thought back to their early days, the quiet dates in Botswana, the secret trips, the nights when they seemed like the only two people in the world. He had always seen those moments as sacred, proof that their bond was real. But now, rereading them through the lens of her journal, he began to wonder, were those moments authentic, or were they rehearsals? In one entry, Meghan allegedly wrote, "Public believes in fairy tales. Theirs ended with Diana. Ours will revive it. Smile through the story." For Harry, that was devastating. His mother, Diana, had been his heart, his shield, his loss. He had always believed Meghan understood that pain. And yet here, she was writing about Diana not as a source of comfort, but as a point of strategy, a way to shape the narrative, to step into the void left behind. Doesn't that sting? To realize that the person you thought was healing your wounds might have been leveraging them instead? And yet, part of Harry resisted believing it. Love makes you blind. Love makes you forgive. He told himself maybe these were just thoughts, fleeting ideas, a woman trying to process the enormity of what she was stepping into. After all, marrying into the royal family isn't like marrying into any other family. Maybe she had to think about optics. Maybe she was simply overwhelmed. But then came another entry, dated just after their engagement interview. The one where Meghan famously charmed the world, laughing with Harry, resting her hand on his, looking every bit the glowing fiancé. In her journal, she had written, "Act natural. Keep eyes soft. World must believe it's love at first sight. He sells it well. Stay aligned. He sells it well." For Harry, that line was a dagger. It suggested not that their chemistry was natural, but that it was a performance, something to be sold to the world like a movie script. He thought about all the times people had called him besotted in the press, all the times he had defended her against critics, insisting their love was real. And here was her private note, reducing his sincerity to stagecraft. So which was it? A love story or a strategy? Harry's mind spiraled. He thought about the way Meghan had always seemed composed in public, the way she controlled every gesture, every smile. He had admired it once, thought it showed strength. But now, looking back, it all felt rehearsed, managed, curated. Let's be honest, don't we all sometimes wonder whether what we're seeing is real, or just the version someone wants us to see? In this case, Harry was beginning to realize that what he thought was spontaneous affection might have been an act rehearsed in private, written in ink long before the cameras rolled. The contradiction was crushing. On one side, Harry's heart. On the other, Meghan's words. He wanted to believe their love story was true, But the journal was screaming that it had been a strategy from the beginning. And then came the entry that broke his resolve. Dated just weeks before the wedding, Meghan had written, "Stay long enough to build the brand. Then go." Those weren't the words of a woman in love. Those were the words of someone mapping out her future. They weren't about forever. They were about long enough. Harry realized that to Meghan, their love story had an expiration date, and the clock had already started ticking. So was it ever love at all? Or was he just the vehicle, the platform, the key that unlocked the global stage? That's the question Harry couldn't shake. And that's where the heartbreak lies. Because love and strategy can't coexist without one consuming the other. If you believe it was love, then the strategy makes it a betrayal. If you believe it was strategy, then the love was never real to begin with. Either way, Harry was trapped in a devastating contradiction. And as he turned the page, he realized the journal wasn't just about ambition. It wasn't just about plans. It was about him, his weaknesses, his role, his very identity as a prince and as her husband. The next entry wasn't about optics or branding. It was about Harry himself. And what Meghan wrote there would shatter him more deeply than any strategic plan ever could. Because the words weren't just cold, they were cruel. And once he read them, he would never look at his wife the same way again. Weddings are supposed to be sacred. A covenant. The moment when two people stand before God, their families, and the world, promising a forever that nothing should break. For Harry, his wedding to Meghan was more than that. It was redemption. After years of struggle, grief, and loneliness, this was his chance to step into the light again. He had believed every smile, every whispered, "I love you," every moment of hand-holding beneath the stained glass of St. George's Chapel. But as he flipped to the journal entry dated just days before the wedding, that sacred memory began to unravel. The page was crisp, the ink bold. Meghan had written with a confidence that chilled him. Tomorrow the stage is set. The dress, the guests, the cameras, all pieces of the moment. The world will believe in love. But I must remember, this is not my destination. It is my launch. Launch. That word rang in Harry's ears like a funeral bell. What had been the happiest day of his life was, in her own words, the beginning of something else entirely. Not a marriage, but a campaign. Not a covenant, but a performance. And it wasn't just the single word. The entry was littered with references that made Harry's stomach churn. Mentions of optics, global spotlight, and how to control the narrative. She even wrote, "Smile at the Queen, Project Grace. Lock eyes with Harry, Project Devotion. Hug Doria, Project Roots. Every image must tell the story we want. Project. Not feel. Not live. Project." Imagine being Harry, reading those lines. To him, those moments had been real. When Meghan locked eyes with him during the ceremony, he had believed he was looking into the soul of his wife. But in her journal, it was a tactic, a staged act for billions to consume. And then came the cruelest cut of all, scrawled near the bottom of the page. "Don't get swept away. This is the brand-making moment." Harry's hand went cold. Brand-making. While he had stood trembling with emotion, barely able to keep his tears in check, Meghan had been thinking about brand building. The gulf between their realities was cavernous, and it was only growing with every word he read. Now, let's stop and reflect. We all know couples who see their weddings differently. For one, it's about the sacred vows. For the other, it's about the perfect photos. But this wasn't about a perfect picture album. It was about empire. It was about using the most intimate, sacred moment of Harry's life as a springboard into a global enterprise. Harry remembered how nervous he had been that morning, his hands shaking, his heart racing. He remembered William trying to calm him, the roar of the crowd outside, the sound of trumpets filling Windsor. He remembered Meghan walking down the aisle, radiant, breathtaking, the world gasping as if it had all been a fairy tale. He had believed it, every bit of it. But now he wondered, had she? Or had she been silently ticking boxes in her mind? Smile here, pause there, sell the story everywhere? The entry even mentioned the press. Media will feast, control their hunger, give them the story they crave, but make them want more. Mystery is power. Mystery, power. These were not the thoughts of a bride overwhelmed by love. They were the calculations of a strategist. Harry felt his chest tighten as he read the final line of that entry. "Tomorrow I wear the crown's jewels, but only for a time. The real crown is freedom. Freedom. Another word that took on a sinister meaning in hindsight. At the time, Harry had thought their marriage was the freedom he'd been searching for, the freedom from loneliness, from being the spare, from living under the shadow of tragedy. But in Meghan's eyes, freedom meant escape. Freedom meant breaking away. Freedom meant leaving him and the institution behind once the timing was right. And that's when the truth began to settle in for Harry. The wedding hadn't been the start of their forever. It had been, for Meghan, the final step before the exit. The launchpad for everything that came after, the interviews, the Netflix deals, the book tours. It was all foreshadowed, all pre-written in her private words. But here's the cruelest irony of all. Harry had given up so much to marry Meghan. His relationship with his brother, strained. His bond with his father, fractured. Even his connection to the British public, tested. He had sacrificed it all for love. And yet the journal suggested Meghan had always been planning not to join his world, but to leave it. Think about the magnitude of that betrayal. A wedding is supposed to be the one day where everything is honest, pure, and sacred. Yet for Harry, it was allegedly just another chapter in a strategy he hadn't even known he was part of. But the pain didn't stop there. Because the very next entry wasn't just about the wedding as a launch. It was about Harry himself, his role, his purpose, his usefulness in the grand scheme. And what she wrote about him wasn't just strategic. It was devastating. Harry braced himself, because the next words he read would cut deeper than any betrayal yet. They would show him how his wife truly saw him. Not as a partner, not as a soulmate, but as a means to an end. Harry sat back in the chair, the journal trembling in his hands. He had already seen enough to question everything he thought he knew about his marriage. The entries about optics, the wedding as a launch, the references to branding, it was already too much. But the next set of pages was where the words stopped being abstract strategy and became painfully, personally directed at him. This was no longer Meghan writing about plans in the abstract. This was Meghan writing about Harry. His role, his weaknesses, his usefulness, his purpose. The entry began bluntly. Harry is the key. 3 words. Simple, devastating. Not Harry is my love. Not Harry is my forever. Just Harry is the key. The key to what? Harry didn't have to guess. As he read on, the answer was spelled out with chilling clarity. Without him, there is no entry point. He is the door to the crown, the platform, the global stage. With him, I gain the world's eyes. With him, I gain legitimacy. With him, the empire begins. Harry felt his stomach twist. To think of himself not as a man, not as a husband, not as a partner, but as an entry point, as a door, as an instrument. It stripped him of humanity, reduced him to a stepping stone in her grand plan. And it didn't stop there. Meghan had written about how his vulnerabilities could be harnessed. His pain is his power. He longs to be understood, to be healed. I can be that image. If I soothe him, he will defend me against all. His trauma makes him loyal. That is my shield. Let that sink in. She wasn't writing about wanting to comfort him out of love. She was writing about how his grief, his lifelong wound from losing Diana, could be used as leverage to bind him to her. What kind of cruelty is that? To look at the deepest scar in someone's soul and see not empathy, but opportunity. For Harry, this must have been unbearable. All those times Meghan had comforted him when he spoke of his mother, all the gentle words, all the assurances, it had felt real, healing, sacred. But here, in her own writing, she allegedly admitted that his trauma was her shield. Not his heart, not his happiness, his pain. Harry slammed the book shut for a moment, his chest heaving. Was every tender moment they had shared tainted now? Was every word of comfort just part of the plan? He didn't want to believe it. He wanted to cling to the idea that maybe she had written these things in a moment of confusion, that maybe it was just notes, not truth. But as he opened the journal again, the next line crushed that fragile hope. Harry is emotional, not logical. That is the advantage. He will follow his heart, even when it hurts him. That makes him predictable. Predictable. Advantage. These weren't words of love. These were words of exploitation. Let's pause and ask. How would you feel if the person you trusted most secretly wrote down your vulnerabilities like assets in a business deal? Could you ever forgive that? Could you ever look at them the same way again? But Harry kept reading, because he had to know the full truth. Another entry elaborated. The world sees him as the lost boy. I can be the answer they cheer for. Our love story is their redemption arc. But once the story is secured, the brand must move beyond him. Beyond him. Harry's throat went dry. It wasn't just that he was the key to opening the door. He was also meant to be left behind once the door had served its purpose. His greatest fear, that he would never be enough, was written plainly in her hand. The next entry turned darker still. Meghan had outlined how his conflict with the royal family could be used to her advantage. Position as outsider. Show how he broke free for me. It makes me heroine, him rebel. Together we are unstoppable. But narrative must always center on me as the light. Harry's sacrifice, leaving behind the only life he had ever known, wasn't framed as an act of love. It was, according to her words, a narrative device. He was cast as the rebel prince, but she was always meant to be the heroine, the center, the light. For Harry, this was too much. The man who had given up everything to protect Meghan was realizing that in her story, he wasn't the hero. He was the supporting character, the pawn, the key. And yet, the journal went even further. Meghan had written about his relationship with William, with Charles, even with the Queen. She noted how fractured those bonds already were, how easily Harry's defensiveness could be redirected. One line read, "He feels second to William. Always. Feed that. He will cling to me tighter if I reinforce that I see him, not the spare." Harry's breath caught. The word spare was one he had used himself, one that had haunted him his whole life. To see it written there, as part of a strategy, as something she could feed to bind him to her, was beyond betrayal. He closed his eyes, wishing the words away. But they wouldn't leave. Because once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. And still, he turned the page. Because part of him, perhaps the masochistic part, needed to know just how deep it went. The next entry contained a line so sharp, so merciless, that it would echo in his mind forever. He thinks it's love. I see leverage. That was the truth of it. Stripped bare, unfiltered. Their marriage, their story, his devotion, all reduced to leverage. At that moment, Harry realized that the journal wasn't just revealing strategy. It was revealing her truth. And that truth shattered him. But the journal wasn't finished. Because the next section wasn't about Harry as a person. It was about what came after him. The empire. The blueprint. The vision she had crafted long before the vows. And what Harry would read there would show him that Meghan's plan went far beyond their marriage. It was bigger, colder, and it had been waiting all along. Harry's knuckles were white as he gripped the journal. His eyes stung, but he couldn't stop. Every page felt like a knife, sharp, deliberate, calculated. But what came next wasn't just about their relationship. It wasn't just about him. It was about something bigger, something global. Meghan had mapped it all out. The entry began with a bold headline scrawled across the top of the page in dark ink. Blueprint for the future. Harry's heart sank. The words were underlined twice, as if to emphasize their importance. He read on, and with each line, his stomach twisted tighter. Phase 1. Secure position through marriage. Phase 2. Build visibility, philanthropy, interviews, media charm. Phase 3. Create independent platform. Step away with story intact. Phase 4. Monetize freedom. Build global brand. Phase 5. Legacy, foundation, empire, impact. It wasn't a diary anymore. It was a business plan, a manifesto. Harry could almost hear her voice in those lines, cool and confident, framing their marriage not as the beginning of a shared life, but as the launchpad for her own independence. Every milestone, every smile, every appearance, every carefully worded speech was accounted for in advance. Imagine being Harry, reading that. For years, he had believed he was choosing love, escaping the suffocating constraints of royal life for a woman who finally saw him for who he was. But here, in her own handwriting, was proof that their marriage was only the first phase of a far grander design. Let's pause for a moment and ask, have you ever felt like a chapter in someone else's story rather than the co-author of your own? That's the devastation Harry was feeling. He turned the page, and his eyes fell on a list titled Potential Partnerships. Underneath were names that stunned him. Big Hollywood studios, streaming giants, fashion houses, even media moguls. Scribbled beside them were notes like brand alignment, visibility opportunities, and control narrative. Harry's chest tightened. These weren't the private thoughts of a woman overwhelmed by love. These were the calculations of someone preparing to step onto the world stage, someone who had always been thinking ahead, always planning the pivot. And then, beneath the partnerships list, Meghan had written, archetypes, Archwell, content, stories. True family. Those two words devastated him. His mother was gone. His father was distant. His brother was strained. And Meghan had positioned herself as the only one left. To read it written down, not as love but as strategy, to see his isolation reduced to leverage, was beyond cruel. Let's stop here and ask, what kind of love builds itself by tearing down everything else around you? Could you still believe in someone's heart if you saw their private words plotting to use your family's flaws as tools? Harry flipped to another entry, this one written after their first official Christmas at Sandringham with the Queen. He remembered that holiday, how tense it had been, how Meghan had smiled through it all while whispers floated behind closed doors. In her journal, she had written, Act warmth, act charm, project inclusion. But never forget, they will never accept me. Their coldness is my weapon. Public will see contrast. I win sympathy, they lose image. Harry's throat went dry. To him, that Christmas had been painful but hopeful. He had thought Meghan was trying to integrate, to be accepted. But here, her own words revealed she hadn't seen rejection as a wound. She had seen it as a weapon. The colder they were, the more power she gained. And then came the most shocking part. Meghan had written about the Queen herself, in words that chilled Harry to the bone. She is the crown, not the woman. Respect publicly, dismiss privately. Time will erase her. My story will outlast hers. Harry slammed the journal shut. He couldn't breathe. His grandmother, his anchor, the one who had always been constant in his chaotic life, dismissed in one cruel line. Meghan hadn't just married into his family. She had reduced them to stepping stones. But the entries went further still. Meghan had even outlined how to use the press against the royals. Leak carefully. Frame as victim. Frame as modern. Frame as freedom. The palace cannot fight optics. They are bound by silence. Use that silence. Control narrative. It was all there. The strategy that would later define the years to come. The interviews, the bombshells, the documentaries. It was written down before the wedding. The plan wasn't reaction. It was preparation. Harry's hands shook as he reopened the journal, desperate to stop, but unable to resist. The last line of that section burned into him. The family is a cage. Harry is my key. Together we leave, but I lead. I lead. The words echoed like thunder in his head. She hadn't seen him as equal. She hadn't seen the royals as family. She had seen herself as the leader of a story in which everyone else was simply a role to be played. And that's when the fear set in. Because if Meghan had written this much about his family, what else was in the pages he hadn't yet turned? What else had she been planning in silence, smiling all the while, holding his hand in public as though nothing was amiss? Harry braced himself, because what came next wasn't just about his family. It was about timing. It was about betrayal woven into the very milestones of their life together. The next entries weren't just cruel observations. They were dated. They lined up with their public love story. And what Harry discovered was that even on the nights he thought were sacred, Meghan had been writing something very different in private. The timeline of betrayal was about to unfold. Dates don't lie. They anchor us. They remind us where we were, what we were doing, what we felt in a given moment. For Harry, dates carried the weight of history. His mother's death in 1997, his military service years later, the birth of his children. But as he turned the pages of Meghan's journal, he realized the dates carried a different weight altogether. They told a story not of love, but of calculation. And every time he matched one of her entries to a public milestone in their relationship, the betrayal cut deeper. The first date he noticed was November 2017. That was the month they publicly announced their engagement at Kensington Palace. Harry remembered the crisp winter air, Meghan's white wrap coat, the smile that stretched across his face as he told the world he was marrying the woman he loved. The press called it magical. The world swooned. But in her journal, Meghan had written, "Step secured. Public bought in. Use Diana parallels. Harry's devotion sells narrative. Engagement equals global anchor." Global anchor. What had been the happiest day of his life had been, to her, a chess move. A moment to secure position, to tie herself to his legacy and his late mother's memory. Harry's breath caught as he realized what that meant. Their engagement hadn't been a celebration of love. It had been a transaction. He flipped to the next page. The date leapt out at him. May 19th, 2018, their wedding day. The entry he had already glimpsed before, but this time he read the entire passage. Billions will watch. Every gesture must be deliberate. This is not a wedding. It is a broadcast. Brand launch. Play perfection. Project devotion. Tomorrow begins the climb. Harry's throat tightened. He remembered standing at the altar, his heart pounding, tears threatening to fall as Meghan walked toward him. He had thought it was the most authentic moment of his life. But in her journal, it was described as a launch. A broadcast. A climb. To her, the vows weren't sacred, they were optics. And then came October 2018, the announcement of Meghan's pregnancy with Archie. Harry had been overjoyed. He had wept privately, thinking his life had come full circle. The family he had lost with Diana's death was being rebuilt with Meghan. But in the journal, Meghan had written, "Pregnancy shifts narrative. Critics soften. Sympathy grows. Perfect timing. Use media carefully. Maintain mystique." Harry felt like the floor dropped out from under him. The joy he had felt at becoming a father. Was it real to her, or was it just another card played at the perfect time? The idea that even their child's existence was viewed in terms of optics rather than love sickened him. But it didn't stop there. Another entry, dated January 2019, spoke of their first overseas tour. The one where Meghan appeared radiant, pregnant, shaking hands with dignitaries, winning the world's admiration. Harry had seen it as proof that they could thrive together on the global stage. But Meghan's words read differently. Tour equals brand showcase. Royal platform gives legitimacy. Capture headlines. Secure global sympathy. Always plan for what comes after crown. What comes after crown? The phrase hit Harry like a punch. Even then, less than a year into their marriage, Meghan was already plotting life beyond the monarchy. The royal tours, the global adoration, it wasn't about duty. It was about brand positioning. And then came June 2019, Archie's christening. Harry remembered the pride, the family gathered, even if strained, and the photographs shared with the world. But in the journal, Meghan had written, "Control imagery. Keep mystery alive. Limit exposure. Every withheld moment increases value later. Privacy equals currency. Privacy is currency." Their child, their family, wasn't just sacred, it was strategic. The fewer glimpses the world had, the more powerful those glimpses became. It was monetization, not motherhood. By the time Harry reached January 2020, he already knew what he would find. The infamous Megxit. Their decision to step back as senior royals had shocked the globe. Harry had thought it was born of necessity, that they were drowning under the pressures of palace life, that escape was survival. But Meghan's journal entry, dated weeks before, chilled him. Exit imminent. Timing aligns with global interest. Leverage sympathy. Position as independence, not rejection. Launch Archwell post-exit. Harry will frame as protection, stronger narrative. It had all been written. The timing, the framing, even his own role as the protective husband. He wasn't a partner in that decision. He was a prop in a plan executed to perfection. Let's pause and ask, how would you feel if every milestone of your relationship, every engagement, every wedding vow, every child, every major decision, was pre-written in someone's private notes? Wouldn't you start to question if any of it had ever been real? For Harry, the answer was obvious. His entire marriage was flashing before his eyes in a new, horrifying light. He wasn't reading a diary anymore. He was reading a script. And worse, he was beginning to see that the script had always been playing out, line by line, while he stood on stage believing it was unscripted. But the worst was yet to come, because the timeline didn't just include milestones. It included the night before the wedding. An entry dated May 18th, 2018 caught Harry's eye. He had already skimmed it, but now he forced himself to read it in full. Meghan had written, "Tomorrow I play the role. Smile, vow, promise. But remember, this is step, not destination. The real journey begins after I say I do." Harry's chest caved in. For him, "I do" had been the beginning of forever. For her, "I do" had been the start of the climb. He set the journal down, trembling, his heart pounding in his chest. Every date, every memory, every sacred moment, they were all poisoned now. What had been milestones of love were entries of strategy. What had been a marriage was a timeline of betrayal. But Harry wasn't finished, because the next pages didn't just outline milestones. They focused on one night in particular, the night before their wedding. And the entry from that night held words so cold, so merciless, that Harry would never forget them. It was the moment he realized that the fairy tale he thought he was living might never have existed at all. The night before a wedding is supposed to be a quiet, intimate moment. A final pause before the world watches you pledge your life to someone. Harry had imagined it that way. A few stolen hours together, laughter, maybe nerves, but ultimately, love reaffirmed. But the journal told a different story. The entry, pinned meticulously in Meghan's hand, was dated May 18th, 2018. Every word seemed intentional, calculated. Not about love, not about commitment, but about performance. Tomorrow the world sees a union, it began. They will believe in magic. I will smile, nod, embrace. They will not know the plan. They cannot know. This is the crescendo. This is the stage. I am ready. Harry felt a chill crawl up his spine. He remembered that night vividly. The hush of their home, the quiet before the storm of media attention, the anticipation in the air. He had thought it was nervous excitement, shared intimacy, love expressed in private glances. Now he realized those moments might have been rehearsed, orchestrated, even manipulated. The journal continued. Harry trusts me. He believes in forever. That is the advantage. Let him feel it. Let him believe. Every touch, every word, every glance must reinforce narrative. Forever is temporary. Forever is temporary. For Harry, those 4 words cut deeper than any sword. The man who had given up so much, who had placed his heart fully in Meghan's hands, read that his love was never permanent. That his devotion, his sacrifice, his dreams, they were tools for someone else's ambition. He flipped the page, and his heart sank. Meghan had outlined exactly how she would use that night. Evening, calm demeanor. Reassure Harry. Build trust. Subtle gestures, hand on arm, gentle smile. Hearts will believe in authenticity. Cameras will capture love. Truth will be hidden. Cameras. Truth hidden. Harry remembered how he had held her hand that night, how he had whispered words of love and anticipation. He had believed it was real. He had believed she felt the same. And now, reading these words, he wondered if she had been playing him the entire time. And then came the final, most damning lines. Tomorrow. Vows, smiles, commitment. Public will cheer. Private reality. Step toward freedom, step toward empire. Harry will see it as love. I will see it as leverage. Timing is crucial. Timing is crucial. Leverage. Harry's hands shook. The reality was undeniable. This wasn't a diary. This was a strategy session. He had been living a fairy tale, but to Meghan, it had been a launch sequence. Every promise, every vow, every tear he had shed, it had been part of a carefully orchestrated performance, a step toward independence and global recognition. He sank into the chair, overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. He had trusted her completely. He had believed in their love story. And now, her own words suggested that love had been secondary to ambition. Yet even in that darkness, a question lingered. Why? Why write it down? Why document it in such detail? Was it arrogance? Confidence? Or simply a reflection of a mind always thinking ahead, always planning the next move? Harry didn't know. And perhaps that uncertainty was the cruelest blow of all. Because without knowing intent, betrayal becomes 1,000 tiny wounds, each one sharpening the pain. He closed the journal for the night, placing it gently back where he had found it. But sleep did not come easily. Every memory of that night, the whispers, the laughter, the anticipation of vows, was now tainted. Every shared glance seemed rehearsed. Every word of comfort now seemed like part of a script. And yet, he couldn't stop thinking. Because as much as he wanted to deny it, the truth was clear. The journal didn't lie. It didn't speculate. It didn't suggest. It documented. And the documentation painted a picture of a woman whose love for him was measured, calculated, and leveraged for her own goals. Harry knew one thing for certain. The wedding had not been the beginning of a shared life. It had been the first act of a performance, one in which he had unknowingly played the central role. And the next morning, when vows were exchanged, cameras clicked, and the world cheered, Harry wondered, had the fairy tale ever been real? Because what came next, the first public appearances, the carefully staged interviews, the rising fame, would show him how far the plan had already advanced. And the realization hit him with full force. The night before, "I Do" was never about love. It was about leverage. And Harry would soon discover that the blueprint went even further, mapping every move he would make, every role he would play, every heart he would offer without knowing it was already collateral in her grand design.